So you listen to the red-hot rhetoric about an immigrant invasion these days, and you think that we might be seeing unprecedented numbers of people here illegally. Well, we got our hands on the actual immigration detention numbers for Colorado and Wyoming. You don't see those often. They tell a different story. Our Anusha Roy has that.
Throughout 2013, close to 6,000 people were in ICE custody in Colorado and Wyoming. That was under the Obama administration. In 2014, the number started to go down, hitting a low in 2015, then climbed back up to more than 5,500 last year. When you pull back to look at the big picture, the number of people ICE deported across the country follows a similar pattern, with an uptick in 2018. This was after President Trump signed an executive order expanding who was a priority for deportation.
None of these year-to-year changes are the result of a single policy decision. Fact is, people are more complicated than that.
DU law professor Cesar Hernandez said to truly understand these numbers requires a history lesson that goes beyond how different presidents address immigration.
The number of people that the Border Patrol has been apprehending is a drop in the bucket right now.
The Pew Research Center said that record number was in 2000, with more than 1.6 million people arrested, nearly twice the number of arrests in the last year. Hernandez said as political instability and violence plague countries in Central America, people will continue to try and cross the border. But what did change is that Mexico's economy is slowly getting stronger. Their demographics have also changed.
There are fewer people reaching adulthood. There are fewer people in their 20s and 30s. And those are the people who historically leave their countries in search of opportunity.
Mexico also changed how it patrols its own border, starting when President Obama was in office, and now uses their National Guard to patrol their border with Guatemala to try and stop people from crossing into Mexico who may be on their way to the U.S.
A local immigration lawyer, Hans Meyer, said that they've seen their caseload go up in the last 2 years. And he said that he believes rhetoric has played a role in scaring people away from trying to enter the U.S. illegally or even accessing the U.S. immigration court system once they're in the country, which, of course, right now is facing a serious backlog for people who are currently in that system.
And you'll hear folks who are immigration hardliners say that the threat of enforcement is intended to be that kind of deterrent to keep people from trying to cross illegally. You would think that people who are locked up in Colorado for immigration violations were probably arrested here in our local communities. That's changed over time.
Yeah, so what Hans Meyer said it was originally, especially because of geographically where we're located, for a really long time that population was people who had been living in the U.S. for quite some time, had a run-in with ICE, was arrested. But in the last year or two, that started to change. They started to see more people who were arrested at the southern border then get transferred into Colorado and Wyoming.
All right. Very interesting. Thank you, Anusha. Appreciate it.